For the time being, a major crisis has been averted in the Middle East. People were tensely anticipating an all out shooting war between Iran and Israel, and that would have torpedoed the global economy. That would have given a big hit to the recovering economies of the world. It would have sent the oil prices skyrocketing through the roof and bring upon economic misery to the world. As it is, we were seeing the price of oil had already reached $90 a barrel, and with the anticipation of a major war in the Middle East, a major widening of the conflict, these were bound to go up and create a global crisis. For the time being, please mark my words, for the time being, that seems to have been averted. But what we are seeing is a paradigm shift in the power play in the Middle East. So far, courtesy the United States, Israel had absolute technological supremacy over all its opponents in the Middle East, whether state or non state actors. Right? It could hit any country at will and get away with it. It had been carrying out covert strikes. It had killed Iranian nuclear scientists. It had tried to hit the facility at Isfahan even earlier in 2023. It had used cyber attacks, Stuxnet virus to disable the nuclear enrichment facilities, etc., without a response. So far, Iran's response had been confined to the proxy war level of fighting through its proxies of the three H's: Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi, as also the Shia pro Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria. The fact of the matter is, so far it had been a proxy war for the last 3 to 4 decades. But all that changed with the Iranian intense missile strike on the 13th of April. It has sent shockwaves not only through the Middle East but through the world because of the fears of a wider global war. There is another, for military historians, for military analysts, a very significant trend which has been now underlined and established by the Iranian missile strike of 13th April. The world over, the trend is shifting. So far, the trend that we had seen the world over was airstrikes were the opening salvos of any conflict between nations, and the entire spectrum of war was dominated by air power. Now, missile strikes and missile power is rapidly overtaking air power strikes, manned fighter bomber strikes. We have seen this already in the Ukraine, where the Russian Air Force, despite its numerical and technological superiority, has consistently avoided a heavy emphasis on air power, on tactical aviation, and it has been using that largely in the standoff mode because air defenses have become lethal. The accretion in the power of the air defense has caused a kind of a paradigm shift. And you find that, like in 1973, tactical aviation cannot have a free run over the skies. Even the Russian aircraft largely are confined to firing from their own side of the border with standoff cruise missiles, standoff glide toss bombs. It's only now that glide toss bombs have increased the usage of Russian tactical aviation. Otherwise, tactical aviation has been going into the background, and rocket forces and drones have taken over. The unmanned systems have taken over the entire role of initiating conflict, sustaining conflict, and getting the upper hand. The simple fact is that these drones and rockets are much cheaper than possibly the defensive means. So we are seeing an era of missile warfare, rocket warfare, which is already upon us. China had been very prescient. It was one of the first countries that, after the Gulf War 1 and 2, had started going in, had seen the performance of the Iraqi studs and the scare they created, and had started creating rocket forces. Today, it has the largest rocket force in the world, right? And it has gone in also for a big way for drones. This trend was clearly established in the Russia Ukraine war over the last 2 years plus. Now, what has happened between Iran and Israel had only reinforced this very significant trend. We in India will have to take note. We will have to play far greater reliance on our rocket forces and our drones than hitherto. Now, let's take a look at the recent cycle of events because they have a lot of instructional value for militaries the world over. How did it all start? On the 1st of April this year, Israel's F-35 fighters, they launched an airstrike on the Iranian consulate in Syria. There was intelligence reports to the effect that a large contingent of the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders from Iran, were coming there for a conference with their proxies, the Syrian and Iraqi Shia militias, as also possibly representatives of the other proxies of Iran. Now, Israel could well have hit them while they were en route to this conference, but Israel did not. It waited for all 11 of them to assemble at the Iranian consulate in Syria, and then it struck. So the initial speculations were the initial speculations were that Israel is deliberately trying to provoke Iran into an excessive reaction that would give Israel the excuse or the justification to mount a major attack on the Iranian nascent nuclear capability, on the nuclear facilities at the 5 sites in Iran. That was the initial speculation. But now things look a little different. It was first stated that Israel had not warned the United States. It now turned out that it had informed them at the last minute, and the United States Defense Secretary on 3rd April had complained to Israel that this very late warning could have endangered its forces in the Middle East. So Israel took this decision, and as is now coming out in the media, open media sources, that Israel seems to have miscalculated. Israel seemed to have thought that, like in the previous occasions when they had killed nuclear scientists, attacked cyber attacks on the Isfahan facility, and also physical attacks, there had been no reaction from Iran. Iran had been very, very curtailed in its reaction, very circumspect, because it did not want to escalate and give an excuse for Israel to attack Iran and also join the United States and have its nuclear facilities destroyed. Also, its economy given a serious setback. Now there has been a paradigm shift. When this attack came, there was outrage in Iran. A embassy, a consulate, is sovereign national territory. Any attack on an embassy is tantamount to an attack on the soil of that nation. Iran was outraged, number one. Number two, Iran, with almost about 3,000 missiles, cruise and ballistic missiles of all kinds in its arsenal, and a huge swarm of Shahid drones under its belt, now felt it had the military power to hit back, that it was now a power to reckon with in the Middle East, and it wanted to underline that fact with a strong, robust response that would send a clear message that any attacks on its sovereignty were strictly a no, and it would respond very strongly in military terms. Now, when this happened, quite obviously, the United States was concerned that there would be or there was major scope for a widening of the conflict and escalation, vertical and horizontal, in the Middle East. From the very beginning of this war, the American attempt has been, from the very outset, to keep this conflict confined and not let other non-state actors like Hezbollah and Houthis get involved, and not let state actors like Iran get into a direct conflict with Israel and widen this conflict. It wanted to let Israel focus on the Hamas, sort that out so that the threat to Israel from that major source was neutralized. To that extent, you will recall that at the very outset of this war, 6 months plus ago, last year, United States had sent 2 carrier battle groups to the Mediterranean of its Fifth Fleet to give a clear signal to all other likely entrants into this conflict, those who would try and intervene, to stay off, to stay clear and not invite American retaliation. This was their very, very major strategic support to Israel, to beleaguered Israel, which had just been hit by a dastardly strike, which had killed 1,200 of its citizens and 300 plus as hostages. The United States' strategy to prevent a widening of this conflict has been only partially successful so far. As we have seen, the Houthis entered the fray. The Hezbollah entered the fray in a minor way because they were quite worried of the reaction, the extreme reaction that Israel could give. They were only gingerly firing rockets, etc. But even that forced Israel to evacuate 70,000 of its citizens from northern Israel so that they wouldn't become victims of Hezbollah rocket barrages. The Houthis have created a fair amount of trouble, and despite United States and the NATO allies sending a task force to the Red Sea, task force to the Straits of to those Bandar al-Abbas Straits, etc., coast of Aden, the Houthis have continued their strikes, albeit a little not deterred, but a little put down by the fierce air attacks launched by United States, United Kingdom and other countries. But it has not been deterred. There are still the occasional shots being fired. This deterrence regime was seen to be entirely breaking down now with Iran's threatened missile attack to avenge the strike on its consulate. The United States put tremendous psychological pressure on both Israel and on Iran, specifically on Iran, not to escalate the conflict, to limit its retaliation if it had to retaliate, limit it, and curtail it in terms of scope and scale, and make Iran recalculate. So America took positive deterrent measures to make Iran scale back the scope and scale of its counterattack, limit it severely, and recalculate the consequences. To that end, the Americans sent another carrier battle group to the Mediterranean, and the commander-in-chief of the United States Central Command, General Corella, he personally went to Israel, sending a clear signal that he was there to coordinate the defenses of Israel, and it would help Israel physically in beating back any Iranian counter attack. on the horns of a dilemma. It had to react. It was a matter of saving your face. It was a matter of the regime appearing strong in front of its population. Otherwise, it would have led to a popular backlash against the present regime. So it had to appear strong. It had to retaliate. But it had to retaliate in a manner that was not so devastating as to ensure that Israel and the United States were drawn into a war against Iran. Iran was quite clear on that score. So I think they handled it with a lot of strategic patience, with a lot of common sense, and they did hit upon an optimal solution which surprised the world. Because of the dissuasive pressure that the United States had mounted, it was anticipated that the Iranian counterstrike would be fairly muted, that it would be a proportionate response, perhaps confined to striking Israeli embassies in third countries. That was thought of. That was one of the anticipations. But all these were belied by the scope and scale of the Iranian counterattack, which took the United States, Israel, and the whole world by complete surprise. So let's now get into the nitty-gritty of the Iranian counterattack on the 13th of April this year. Iran had taken 13 days to mount its counterstrike. It had deliberated, it had war-gamed the whole escalation ladder that could ensue, and in a very deliberate manner it had now decided to hit. So around midnight on the 13th of April, the Israeli counterstrike started with about a barrage of 170 drones fired from multiple directions, mostly from Iran, also from Iraq and Syria, and some from the Houthi side in Yemen. From multiple directions, this swarm of drones flying at 185 kilometers per hour, very slow moving, very noisy drones. The moment they were launched, they were picked up by American satellites. And as we will discover later, the United States had linked its global and theater ballistic missile defense system, integrated it with the Israeli system, and their sensors, their satellites, their X-band over the horizon radars, and all their computation and communication elements were fully integrated to help the Israelis respond to this massive missile attack. So they picked up this drone movement the moment it started, and it took a leisurely 4 to 5 hours to get to Iranian airspace. And there was a big alert. As it is, Iran had given a 72 hours notice to the United States, and through it, Israel had been warned that this attack was coming. There was no way that they would not strike back. So they had given adequate notice, get ready, we are coming, right? And now they started with this drone swarm. President Biden rushed back to the White House and convened the National Security Council meeting, and they monitored minute by minute the developments. They were monitoring and trying to ensure that this did not blow out of control, escalate out of control. So they were monitoring it from the word go, and they were committed to see that Israel came to no harm. Now, the fact of the matter is that these 170 drones, this is the figure given by Admiral Daniel Hagare, the military spokesman of Israel, and we take it as fairly authentic. They were the people at the receiving end. So 170 of these drones were launched in the first wave. The purpose of this wave, as is now very clear in hindsight, of the Shahid drones, which have been extensively employed in the Ukraine. But there is a caveat, and military analysts must understand this. The caveat is that when the Russians used the Shahid drones, they took away the GPS guidance systems based on American satellites, and they retrofitted their own GLONASS guidance system. That is why these missiles have been far more effective in Ukraine than they were in Israel. Israel could just simply switch off the GPS guidance system, and the Americans have the capability to spoof these guidance systems in times of war. That was one of the major problem areas that the Iranians faced in their drone offensive. They have not retrofitted their drones to be guided by the Russian GLONASS navigation system instead of the American GPS. Be that as it may, these drones were closing in, taking a leisurely 4 to 5 hours to close in to Iranian airspace. The whole world was cautioned. We were all up at night monitoring the various TV channels because these drones were now closing in at a leisurely pace over Iran, towards Israel. But the fact of the matter is that these drones, their primary purpose was deception and decoy. Let's get that right. The primary purpose of these drones was defense and decoy. And very few of them they knew would get through, but the aim was to overwhelm the Israeli air defenses, their warning systems, etc. Around, in the second wave, then, Iran fired the cruise missiles. These take 1 to 1.5 hours to reach Israel from Iran. They are subsonic. They have ranges of about 1,600 kilometers, Pave cruise missiles. So these would land up on the target around at the same time as the slower moving swarm of Iranian drones, Shahid drones. Now the purpose of these cruise missiles was to pick up all the Israeli air defense radars, fire control radars that had been activated and home in onto the air defenses. This was to neutralize Israeli air defenses to the extent possible. These missiles are capable of maneuvering, in flight, changing course in flight to sort of beat the countermeasures. And it is, as per some press reports, stated that they did hit 2 Iron Dome launchers and perhaps some other missile launching facilities. The third wave was the real lethal wave of 120 Iranian medium-range ballistic missiles, the Shahab missiles. It is now clear that no hypersonic Fateh series of missiles were involved. That means Iran had not played its trump card. It had just used the Shahab, the intermediate range ballistic missiles or medium range ballistic missiles, as you can say, 1,500, 2,000 kilometer range, which were launched all from Iran side. Now these take 15 minutes to cover the distance from Iran to Israel. So now we see 3 moving missile masses, one moving taking 5 hours to reach Israel, the second taking 1 to 2, the cruise missiles taking 1 to 2 hours, and at the last are fired the Iranian ballistic missiles, which were designed to achieve the kill purpose on the targets. And all the previous ones were just to ensure that some of them did get through to the target areas. Now, what were the targets of the Iranian missile counter-strike? There were 3 targets. 1, the Nevatim air base in the Negev desert in southern Israel. Second, the Ramov air base. And third, the Unit 8200 intelligence collection facility jointly operated by Israel and the CIA in the Golan Heights, or the Jolan Heights as the Iraqis pronounce it. These were the three main targets, military targets, that Iran had selected for its counterattack. It is noteworthy that Iran did not try and hit any civilian population oblique infrastructure targets which may have had a greater impact on television screens but could have been very, very counterproductive in the level of reaction it would have drawn. These two air bases, Nevatim and Ramon, the Nevatim air base specifically was the base from which the Israeli F-35 aircraft had taken off and gone to hit the Iranian consulate in Damascus in Syria. So it was a very appropriately selected target from the military point of view, that we are hitting the place from where you tried to hit us. We are hitting the air bases. We are hitting the intelligence collection site in the Golan, which facilitated this attack on our embassy. As simple as that. Now comes the most important point, which unfortunately so far seems to have been largely missed in the larger media debate, at least in India. The fact of the matter is that these three targets of the Iranian missile counter-strike, that Nevatim Air Base, Ramon Air Base and the Golan Intelligence Collection Facility, were three of the most heavily defended places on planet Earth. Let me make that very clear. Nowhere on the earth are the anti-ballistic missile defenses more strong and more dense than they are on these three targets that Iran had specifically and by choice selected. How? Let me explain. All the three targets are linked with the American anti-ballistic missile architecture with its headquarters in Colorado, USA. It's also a part of the theater ballistic missile defense over the Middle Eastern area, and which is also linked to the ballistic missile grid through two Aegis destroyers, which had the X-band ANTPS Y2 over the horizon radars, which are meant to pick up ballistic missiles coming in from all directions, 360 degrees, which are also deployed in the Red Sea. In addition, these three targets had layered missile, anti-aircraft missile defenses, which included the Israeli Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 anti-ballistic missile defenses. It included the Patriots, American missiles which have been extensively used in Ukraine. It included the THAAD, very specifically designed to shoot down enemy ballistic missiles. It included the David Sling, medium range surface to air missiles. It included the Iron Dome tactical defense system, which effective 10 to 15 kilometers range, which has been very effective in shooting down Hamas and Hezbollah rockets, which have been showering over Israel for a number of years now. Proven defenses, layered defenses with the best sensors, integrated with the architecture for computation, etc., supercomputers which are involved, all in the United States. These were the three best defended targets in the world. The point to note is that while the media narrative has been spread that the Iranian attack was a complete damn squib, was an absolute damn squib, that nothing got through, and in fact about 97 to 98% of the incoming projectiles were shot down. But what is missed, and that is extremely pertinent from the military analyst point of view, what is missed is that the most critical 7 missiles were fired by Iran at the Navatim Air Base, most highly defended air defense target in the whole world on planet Earth. Out of 7, 5 got through. I'm afraid that should be a matter of concern to the military planners in the United States, to the military planners in Israel. The American weapons anti-ballistic missile system has been tested and has not been found leak-proof. Iran had made a statement of intent and capability. Look, whatever your defense is, whatever your level of warning, we will get through. This is worrying not just for Israel. This should be a cause for concern even for the United States. And I think one major military inhibiting factor which has curtailed the Israeli response and the American willingness to concede or go along with Israeli counterstrikes has been this very alarming fact that despite all the warning, despite the density of air defenses, despite the efficacy of the sensors, these missiles have gotten through. 5 of them on the Navatim air base itself, 2 hit the runway, created craters, and the others hit the storage facilities. They knew that the aircraft would be under concrete pens, etc. And the adequate warning Iran had given to see that no major damage was done. That was part of its escalation control mechanism, right? But the fact is, had eight of these bombs, 8 of these missiles hit the runway, that Nevatim air base would have been out of commission. That is a very significant military development the world needs to take note of. All armed forces over the world need to take off, and especially we in India, because we could be at the receiving end of a massive barrage of Chinese missiles, in the course of any future conflict. So this is some of the things that we will analyze in greater detail as we go on. Now let us analyze the Israeli response to these missile strikes. There are also some very potent or patent military lessons to be learnt there. We have to be very cognizant because missile warfare is the way of the future. That is now cast in stone. Air power is increasingly taking a second place to missile power. And we in India have to understand this, have to integrate it into our planning and weapon acquisition plans, into how much we put on missile power, drone power vis-a-vis manned air power. We will have to keep this into account. Now, as I said, General Kurilla, head of the United States Central Command, was personally in Israel to coordinate the defensive actions. The United Kingdom and France had also pulled in some 200 jet fighters to shoot down the Israeli drones, the Iranian slow-moving drones, as they were closing in onto Israel from 3 to 4 sides. 200 fighter jets, and like I said, 2 Aegis destroyers of the American fleet, configured for anti-ballistic missile defense, with their over-the-horizon radars to pick up ballistic missiles from thousands of miles away. They were deployed, and the entire Israeli air defenses were part of that grid. Now the Israeli air defenses have been superb. Superb. There is just no question about it. There's just no question about it. It is one of the best air defense apparatus in the whole world, and it has proven its efficacy. 97 to 98% of the incoming missiles were shot down by a layered defense combination, like I said, of Arrow 2, Arrow 3, anti-aircraft, anti-ballistic missile defenses, by THAAD, American anti-ballistic missile defenses, by Patriot missile batteries, by David Sling medium-range surface-to-air missiles, and by the Iron Dome tactical ballistic missile system. This proved its efficacy, and they were helped by 200 American, French, British jet fighters on a shooting spree trying to shoot down the penetrating Iranian drones, missiles, etc., well outside Israeli airspace. Most of these were shot down over Syria and Iraq by these three air forces of United States, Britain, and France. 200 jet fighters is not a small number. It's larger than most air forces. This was thrown in. So you couldn't have asked for better, a greater density of defenses. But I'd also like to point out one fact. Even in Ukraine, the percentages of drones and missiles shot down for those fired by Russia, Ukraine claims 70, 80, 90% kills. If you study their communiques after every attack by Russia, the percentage of kills are almost 80 to 90%, 70% at the lowest. It's only now that the Russians have begun to get through with their glide toss bombs, the Fab 2000 and 3000 series, which is now creating a bit of a mayhem in Kharkiv and other places, and they help Avdiivka, the fall of Avdiivka. So we have to understand that this was the densest air defense possible. Next factor, Israel is a very small country, 27,000 square kilometers, compared to Ukraine, which is 6 million square kilometers, right? 600,000 square, 607,000 square kilometers to be exact. So, I mean, that's a vast area to defend. Israel is very compact, and therefore it is one of the easiest areas to defend. Easiest areas to defend. The missiles and drones that hit Ukraine are just coming from Russia next door. The drones and the missiles that could hit Israel have to come from Iran, you know, over Iraq, over Syria, over Saudi Arabia, etc., over Jordan. They have long flight times. So that to that extent, the degree of warning to the air defenses in Israel is far better. Far better. And therefore, the results speak for themselves. 97 to 98%, the Israelis are claiming 99% shot down. What we are trying to point out as military analysts, and Scott Ritter and the others in the United States, very respected military observers, have also stressed this factor. The worrying factor is the crucial 1% or 2 or 3% which have gone through, which were the lethal ballistic missiles designed to do damage. The rest were all to mask, to overwhelm the defenses, and to exhaust the resources of Israel, air defense resources before the main strike. At the Nematin air base, out of the 7 missiles fired, 5 got through, which is a cause for concern globally and especially in the United States and Israel. They'll have to think this through. How did they get through is also a very important aspect. Like I said, the cruise missiles, which Iran fired, they were configured. They have a range of 1,600 kilometers, subsonic speeds, flight time 1 to 2 hours. They were configured to pick up the radar frequencies and to home in onto them. Radar frequencies of the monitoring radars, of the fire control radars, and home in onto them and try and destroy the air defense, try and remove or punch holes in the air defense belt that Israel had put up, very efficacious air defense belt. But the fact was that that was their aim, and there are reports that they did get 2 Iron Dome launchers and possibly another missile battery. No details authentic details are available, so one cannot comment. One will have to await greater inputs from the countries concerned, but that was their aim. The Iranian ballistic missile Shahab they had a booster fitted to their warheads. That means just near the target, the booster would fire and the warhead would separate from the main missile. It would also fire a couple of decoys to fool the Iron Dome and the other air defense projectiles that were being shot at it. Now, because of the larger radar signature, most of the anti-ballistic missile defenses would focus on the carrier missile and enabling the warhead to get through. Very critical, very crucial for us to understand. The Russian missiles all have this capability, and I'm sure the Iranian, the Chinese missiles have it too, and that should be cause for concern. That should be cause for serious concern to us. So, as I said, the main feature is that these 5 missiles did get through and hit and cause damage and send a clear message of deterrent. Now, the Iranians had launched their massive missile strike. The world was taken by surprise by its scope and scale. Nobody had anticipated Iran to fire off 300 plus drones and missiles. There are still some, degree of differences in what were the total number of drones and missiles fired. But we are going by the categorical statements made by the Iranian military spokesman, the Rear Admiral Daniel, you see, because that is an authentic source. So 320 by that, and if out of that, about even 7 to 10 got through, that would mean 2 to 3% success rate, 1 to 2 to 2 to 3% success rate, and of course 97 to 98% success rate for the air defenses. Like I said, Ukraine has been claiming 80 to 90%, sometimes 70%, but given the very heavy defense layers, even that 1 to 2% penetration is a cause for concern. Now, the Americans went into firefighting mode. They had to ensure that there was no major Israeli response which could trigger an all-out war in the Middle East. Iran may ultimately have lost that war, but the fact is it was capable of doing substantial damage. It was capable of targeting oil production facilities in the Middle East. It was capable of blocking the Straits of Hormuz. Iran's own considerable oil resources would not have been available to the world. We would have faced an economic disaster. We would have faced catastrophic rise in oil prices, which could have derailed all global economies and equally the economy of India. So we were all concerned. The whole world was concerned that this conflict should not escalate. Primarily, the United States was concerned. American strategic oil reserves are down to 17 days. And had the price of oil gone up in an election year, it would have been a big blow to Joe Biden himself. And therefore, he had been putting a lot of pressure on Israel not to escalate. Not to escalate. And because of this pressure, now of course the G7 got together and they have imposed sanctions on the Iranian companies that produce the UAVs, Iranian companies that supply the IRGC, and some individuals and entities have been sanctioned, etc. But the fact of the matter is that the real dissuasion came with the pressure, heavy pressure on Israel. Netanyahu, it was stated, at some time refused to take calls. And there was meetings of the Israeli cabinet. And their first response was that they wanted to hit back and hit back hard at the Iranian nuclear facilities. But the cabinet itself was split. And 3 of the voting members had cautioned against this kind of an escalation. And because of the pressure of the United States and its other allies onto Israel, Netanyahu was forced to go in for a very muted, for a very, very curtailed kind of a response. This response came 5 days later, on the 18th of April, with a strike at Isfahan. Isfahan has 4 nuclear plants. It has an airbase where Tomcat squadrons F-14 Tomcat squadrons of the Iranian Air Force are based. It is an IRGC guard headquarters. It is also a production facility for Shahab missiles. It was a very pointed response. There are media reports that one Jericho missile was fired, but Iran says only quadcopter drones locally launched from within Iran were used for this strike, and there was some of these reported to have been shot down at Tabriz itself. So therefore, Iran did not respond. Iran played it down on its media. Initially, it had closed all airspace, etc., but then it opened it because these were just quadcopters and as such not a missile retaliatory attack from Iran. So I believe a lot of signaling must have happened between the CIA and Iran, between the CIA chief, to make sure that this did not escalate. Situation is quite similar to what we faced before our Balakot airstrike. Even then, our dilemma was we had to hit back, but hit back in a way that would ensure that there was no escalation and in our case, no crossing of the nuclear threshold. So there are some very valuable lessons to be learnt from the Iran-Israel missile war that we have seen. It will set the stage for missile wars of the future. There are very pertinent lessons to be learnt by the entire world armed forces and in very specific the Indian armed forces. Thank you.